Welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating botanical mystery straight from Ang's notes on gardening. We're looking at how a completely common weed, something you'd usually just step right over, literally transforms into this profound lesson on survival, adaptation, and just the sheer willpower of nature. We're going to explore the incredibly unexpected, upright resilience of a very specific invader.
Okay, let's dive into this by setting the scene, exactly how Ang describes it. So picture an urban balcony. Out on this balcony, you've got a few empty flower pots. And Ang notes these pots had just been sitting out there, totally ignored, for moons. Just empty, waiting. But nature absolutely hates a vacuum. As Ang writes, quote, "Eventually the wind did what it does best, brought it some seeds from the wild." I mean, what a poetic way to describe a super aggressive biological process, right? The wind is basically this wild delivery service, taking untamed life and airdropping it straight into these strictly contained, man-made flower pots.
And that brings us right to the core question we're tackling in today's explainer. What actually happens when a wildly invasive seed just completely takes over a contained space? Because think about it, you've got a massive clash of two worlds happening right here. You have the boundless, wild energy of a seed literally built to conquer territory, and suddenly it's boxed in by the strict borders of a tiny balcony pod. As Ang saw, these pots weren't just casually visited by these seeds, they were completely overrun. The wild invader didn't just survive, it completely dominated. But how? And honestly, more importantly, how did the plant fundamentally change itself in the process?
Section 1. Anatomy of an invader.
So the uninvited guest that crashed Ang's flower pots is officially called mimosa-pudica, but you probably know it by its much more common name, the sensitive plant. Ang recognized this guy immediately. Now I know the name sensitive plant makes it sound super delicate, maybe a little fragile, right? Well, actually scratch that. As Ang's notes make abundantly clear, this plant is a hardcore invasive species. Its defining trait isn't fragility at all. It's extreme, stubborn resilience. It is built to survive in places where other plants would just instantly give up and die.
And this brilliantly illustrates the invasive toolkit of the mimosa-pudica. Ang breaks down exactly what makes this plant so incredibly tough. First off, it really doesn't care about having perfect conditions. It thrives in just about any soil. Whatever random dirt was sitting in those abandoned pots for moons, yeah, that was more than enough for it. Second, it establishes a rock-solid root system in basically no time at all. It doesn't mess around, it secures itself immediately. And third, and I find this part absolutely fascinating, if you look closely, even the tiny, super young plants have already sent deep, long roots all the way through the pot. Before it even thinks about growing upward, it builds an unbreakable anchor going downward. It is literally a masterclass in aggressive survival.
Section 2. The upright growth mystery.
So here's where the story gets really compelling. We've got a stark contrast. On one hand, you have Ang's childhood memory of the sensitive plant. Growing up, Ang remembers this thing strictly as a ground cover plant. You know the type. It stays super low, creeps along the dirt, and just spreads out horizontally across the ground. That is its standard built-in biological behavior. But look at the reality on this balcony. The plants in these specific pots, they aren't creeping at all. They are growing remarkably upright. They are totally defying what they're quote-unquote supposed to do.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer crazy scale of this change. We are not just talking about a little vertical tilt here. Ang actually measured these plants and found they were reaching heights of half a meter to a full meter. That's over 3 feet tall. For a plant that traditionally hugs the dirt, a strictly ground cover weed just miraculously transformed into this towering stalk simply because it landed on this one specific balcony.
Which naturally forces us to ask, why on earth is a ground cover plant suddenly stretching so incredibly tall? What exactly is going down in that flower pot that totally overrides the plant's natural creeping habit and forces it to just shoot straight up into the sky? I want you to really think about the environment it's in for a second. It isn't sprawling out in some massive open field. It is trapped inside a highly crowded little pot.
And the answer, as Ang cleverly figures out, boils down to one thing: intense competition. See, out in the wild, as a ground cover, it can just casually spread out horizontally to find whatever it needs. But inside the strict, tight walls of a flower pot that it's completely filled up, well, horizontal space vanishes instantly. The pot is packed, so it's literally forced to stretch upward to look for sunlight and compete for resources. It's basically a life or death race to the top. If they stay low, they get completely shaded out by their neighbors and they die. The plant fundamentally altered its own natural growth habit just to survive that cutthroat, competitive environment on the balcony.
Section 3. Lessons in resilience.
So
Aang's very first instinct was to do what pretty much any of us would do, right? Just yank them all out from the wild, toss them away, and be done with it. But after seeing how incredibly well they adapted, Aang decided to try a totally different approach, actually harnessing that wild, aggressive energy. Here's the game plan Aang laid out. Step 1. Keep them contained in a single pot. You definitely don't want them taking over the entire balcony, but keeping them strictly bordered controls that wild nature. Step 2. Evaluate and propagate. Keep a few samples to really study them over the coming weeks. And step 3. Cultivate lovely foliage and nice blooms. Aang notes that if you keep it contained, this super persistent weed actually turns into a really beautiful display. By just setting some firm boundaries, a total invasive nuisance becomes something gorgeous.
So the crucial point is this. We started with some forgotten empty pots and a tiny windblown seed, and we ended up with a towering, incredibly adaptable survivor that completely shattered expectations. And I really want to leave you with this final thought to chew on today. If a simple, creeping weed like the sensitive plant can completely change its fundamental growth habit just to survive a crowded balcony pot, what kind of unseen potential for adaptation exists in our own constrained environments? It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What kind of resilience is hiding just beneath the surface, waiting for the right kind of pressure to make us stretch upward? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep observing the amazing world right outside your window.